these are our mics here. If it's flashing green, that means you're on. And if not, you're off. So you don't need the mic close to you. I don't think it's off where you are. Okay. Thank you. Awesome. How about now? Excellent. Thank you.
All right, well, we can go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for those of us bearing with us with our technical difficulties. This is actually our first event at ELI since COVID, so very exciting, but we're just getting used to all of our technology. So welcome everyone. My name is Madison Calhoun. I'm the Senior Manager of Educational Programs here at ELI. Very excited to welcome you today to today's summer school. This is our first summer school session. It is the careers session. So the format of today's event will be that I will introduce everyone, and then all of our fantastic speakers will have the opportunity to talk about their career journeys and how they got into environmental law. After that, we'll have some roundtable discussion questions, and then for the last 30 minutes, we're saving that for audience questions. So if you're here in person, go ahead and just save your questions until the end. But if you're joining us online, please just submit your questions as soon as you think of them through Zoom's questions feature. And it's helpful if you just submit them as soon as you think of them. So thank you so much for that. And I do want to take a moment to thank all of our speakers for joining us and everyone who is joining us in person and online to watch this webinar. We're very grateful for you today. And I do want to mention that this is the first part of our summer school session, and we will be holding a summer school session every Thursday in June and July at the same time, except for the week of July 4th. So please register for all the others if you're interested. We would love to have you. I'll be moderating today's event. My colleague Chandler Randall will also be helping today for those of you in person. He's in the back. He'll be helping with the virtual questions. And then for all of you attending virtually, if you have any questions or issues with the technology, please just direct message him or email him at randall@eli.org. And I think with that, that is everything logistically I needed to tell you, so we can go ahead and get started. So like I said, we'll be giving everyone a chance to explain their career journeys first. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with that. And I'm going to turn things over to Professor Donna Attanasio from GW Law. And she is the director of the Energy Law program. So go ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madison. I hope everyone can hear me. If you can't, somebody give me a signal. My name is Donna Attanasio. I do direct the Energy Law program at GW Law. I am in the energy field, which certainly at the time I started my career was very distinct from the environmental field, but as I'll talk about, they've very much become one as we've moved forward. So going back quite a ways, how did I get into this? It actually started when I was back in college. I took a course on government regulation, and I was fascinated by this question of whether or not it was the market or government that should best allocate scarce resources. And in particular, in the energy field, how you would both facilitate the build out of the infrastructure needed to deliver energy and at the same time protect consumers. Now, of course, the environmental area also has an economic background in that you're allocating the scarcity of things like clean water, clean air, but they're very different in the sense that one is protecting the planet, one is looking more at people. But now as we've come together, they are really the same thing. We're trying to figure out how we deliver clean energy and protect the planet so that we have both healthy people and healthy planets. So that's where they have come together. But when I was starting my career, coming out of college with that interest, I started working for a regulated utility. I didn't really know which direction I was going to go in, thinking it might be economics, might be business. Decided on law because that was really kind of pulling the levers for regulated companies. And so after doing that, I did decide to go on to law school. And of course, at the time when I was in law school, there really were, other than schools that were in Texas or Oklahoma or West Virginia, which were focused on extraction type of law, energy law wasn't really a thing. I did take an environmental law course. We had one. When I think about students today, obviously you have much greater choices, but if I'm thinking back to, what would I do if I were going through this today? It is really important to take some of those core courses so you get the foundation and so that you understand what you like or don't like about that field of law. Even though we offer a concentration at GW, I don't necessarily encourage all my students to take as many courses as they can, because the main thing you have to do in law school is come out as a good lawyer. And so you really want to be able to get, that corporations and tax and secured transactions and all that stuff and then decide if it's environmental or energy or how those things come together. But in my case, it kind of worked for me because I had no choices. I had to take all of those things and I had to get that broad base. And as I came out of law school, I have to say I was sort of lazy. I interviewed with who came to campus. Again, as I talk to my students these days, I say, don't do that. I mean, I didn't even have, of course, we didn't have email and we didn't have Zoom. But, you know, I didn't even think to apply to some place like the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which would have been a very logical choice and a place where a lot of people of my sort of my colleagues started their careers. But, you know, for students coming out now, take a look at state agencies, trade associations, anybody who's doing the kind of work. Go back to, you know, what it is that drives you, what's your passion, what do you want to do, and think about who's doing that work, because I think that's, you know, finding that. For me, I was lucky. I ended up at a law firm that was representing trade associations and was pushing at that part of the industry that I found interesting. That is, how do we deregulate? How do we break up the monopolies in order to facilitate competition where it was needed while still keeping the government controls that you needed to get to the right result for people? So with that, I went into private practice. I was there for 24 years. I was with the same practice group all those years, although we changed firms 3 times. And the interesting thing about private practice, particularly I was in large firms. When I left, I was a partner at White & Case. You're commanding enormous fees. People don't pay you those fees unless they're paying you to do really interesting, hard, challenging things. To me, that's what kept me there. You know, it started off because the kinds of clients I was representing were really doing the kinds of idealistic work that I was interested in. I stayed because I kept being challenged. I finding it interesting. And also the golden handcuffs. I mean, you know, I was getting paid pretty well. So, you know, that's once you kind of get into that lifestyle, it's hard to break away. And that's something to keep track of as you're thinking about your career path. But once I had that ability to, you know, got to a point where the money wasn't as important, I realized all I was doing was helping people make money. And that wasn't really what drove me. Again, my passion was, how do we make this industry work better for people? And so going over to GW in 2013 gave me that opportunity to sort of think more broadly about, you know, what was interesting to me, what were the issues that drive me, the things that encourage me, and the chance to mentor and to help students along. So I know we'll touch more probably on mentoring later in this conversation, but I will say that one of my other big takeaways is that I found mentors everywhere. Sometimes it's that senior person who, you know, you have coffee with twice a month and they give you some good advice, but often it's that, you know, it's the secretary who hands you the good assignments. It's the person in the next cubicle who has good advice. It's that senior partner who just, you know, works with you day in, day out and trains you. So I think I'll leave it there. You know, the non-law career, the pre-law, the law, private practice, academia, that was kind of how I got to where I am today, and happy to dig in later with any questions.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Next up, we have Alyssa Tarasota, who is a staff attorney here at ELI.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here in person talking to you about my career path. As Madison mentioned, I am a staff attorney here at the Environmental Law Institute, and my work currently focuses on international projects, particularly focusing on the Inter-American region. But I work on a variety of issues at ELI, ranging from researching and providing governance solutions to environmental, social, and economic impacts of illegal gold mining in the Amazon, to domestic environmental and natural resources law and policy issues like aquaculture in Maine. Since ELI's focus is providing innovative, just, and practical law solutions, policy solutions, to the most pressing environmental challenges, while also focusing on being non-advocacy, I consider that part of my work is education. And as a person who is researching and writing to educate an audience, be it policymakers, be it community science, or even students from all levels, being able to look at an issue from all angles and perspectives is really edifying. I always thought that being a lawyer meant always having to pick a side, which is, that's not the case in what I do. And there's so much else you can do as a lawyer in this field. So how did I get here? When I was in law school, I did my JD in Puerto Rico. That's where I'm from. I did not envision myself as an environmental law attorney. My focus was primarily civil rights litigation. I was a research assistant for a constitutional law professor. I was a constitutional law tutor at my law school and also wrote and published a journal article about the right to privacy. So I was pretty much set on being a civil rights attorney. But everything changed for me when Hurricane Maria, a Category 5 hurricane that hit Puerto Rico in 2017. Everything that happened and the aftermath really made me rethink my career. I was 3L back then. And that event made me reconsider, and I ended up in DC in 2019 doing an LLM in environmental and energy law from Georgetown. That first semester of my LLM, I had the opportunity to clerk at the Office of General Counsel at the EPA. And it was definitely one of the most formative experiences in my law career, particularly because I had the opportunity to learn from such experienced attorneys. I networked with them, and eventually my supervisor became and still is one of my professional mentors. So I definitely encourage you to make the most out of your internships, clerkships, reach out to the people around you and not be afraid to ask questions. When I was in my last semester of my LLM, it was spring 2020 and COVID happened. And everything stopped. There was a massive hiring freeze and I could not find a job. But that period, however, helped me explore different opportunities. I went to a lot of virtual networking events. I attended ELI summer school like you are now. And afterwards, I would shamelessly reach out to the panelists to ask them questions and to ask them for advice, which was, advice that was really great. And since I had nothing else to do that summer of 2020, I ended up interning for the Inter-American Association for Environmental Defense, AIDA, which is an international NGO that focuses on environmental and human rights issues in the Inter-American region. The work that I did in AIDA kind of paved the way to the work that I'm doing now, because I focus on doing research about gold mining issues in the Amazon. I also had the opportunity to network with experienced attorneys from all over Latin America. And in September 2020, I started my first job after the LLM, which was a law and policy fellowship at Maryland Sea Grant. Maryland Sea Grant is a science-based organization partially funded by NOAA and the state of Maryland that forms part of a network of 34 university-based sea grant programs around the country and US territories. The program's mission combines scientific research, education, and outreach to provide their partners with unbiased science-based solutions. And I was the first lawyer ever to be hired at Maryland Sea Grant. And I worked among scientists, academics, and Maryland state policymakers to create educational materials, conduct legal scholarship. I had the opportunity to publish an article, and also do outreach activities focused primarily on coastal climate resiliency, aquaculture, and even agriculture. And that materials were distributed to a wide range of audiences. So that's kind of an overview of my career path, and I hope it is helpful to you all. And my recommendation would be is to have a clear goal of what you want, be it is to work in the private sector, be it to work on the public sector. I knew that my goal was always to work in the public sector. So know what you want, but keep an open mind. Be curious to explore diverse opportunities within the field. And also, like I said, do not be afraid to ask questions and reach out to more senior attorneys for advice. And thank you. And I should say that I need to leave a little early due to a previous time conflict, but I'll be happy to answer any questions you have via email. Thanks, Madison.
Thank you so much. Up next, we have Caleb Pearson, who's Senior Counsel at BASF.
Yes. Thank you all, ELI, for inviting me. And thank you all for having me today. And I can go kind of quickly through my matriculation into my career. I'll just say at the onset, it sounds like I planned all of this and it was coordinated, but I can promise you that it was not at all. It just happened this way. So just be aware of that as you're listening and saying, well, this makes sense, why would he do this? That it was not as planned as it seemed. So I started college in 2006. I went to be a commodities trader, so I did agricultural economics, but you guys can do the math, 2010, no one wants to be a commodities trader at that time, right? It's not very valuable in the Great Recession. So I then go to law school. I somehow get a paid first summer internship at Dow AgroSciences, and that's a pesticide company. They also make biotech plants as well, biotech seeds. And I can talk a little bit more about that later. And that really kind of introduced me into environmental law. Pesticides are governed by environmental laws such as Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, Endangered Species Act. And plant biotech that has various environmental statutes as well, such as NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. And so I get there, and then I work for CropLife my second year. During the second year, so CropLife is the trade organization, the trade association that represents the pesticide industry. My third summer, I work at EPA on the biggest pesticide enforcement case in history. So now it's kind of making sense, but again, this is not planned. So my third year I graduate, I can't find a job, so I do contract attorney work for almost a year. I look at it as kind of the most miserable, at the time I thought it was the most miserable time of my life. However, I look back and I was like, oh, I was really fortunate to have like a stable contract position for an entire year. And this is 2014, 2013, where the market is still not great for legal jobs, and there was still a hiring freeze at the government. So somehow I wheedled my way into Social Security, which is kind of not on point where I wanted to be, knowing I kind of wanted to get back into the industry where I had some contacts and some experience, but I did that job, and I'll say, just as the panelists next to me had said, just be open, because it really gave me a strong basis in administrative procedure law. So there I was able really to grasp kind of the nuts and bolts of the APA. So after that, I went to the USDA and I got hired. I was the last person hired by under the Obama administration's general counsel. So, and keep that in mind because we'll come back to him. And I was able to do networking. I shout out to my old mentor, as someone said, Al and Ben Wilson, who was previously at Bear Diamond, who I'm sure the people at ELI know. Ben Wilson introduced me to Scott Fulton, who I'm sure you all know as well. Who introduced me to Avi Garbo, who you all know as well, who then introduced me to the general counsel at USDA, who's now the general counsel at EPA. So kind of making all of those connections. And I went through the interview process and I said, surely I must get this job. And of course I didn't get the job at USDA, but they called me back 2 weeks later and they were able to kind of make another position for me. So I ended up working there, and during the Trump administration, I think when a lot of people were kind of trying to run for the hills, something unique happened where I was able to kind of rise because of my knowledge of pesticides. So I ended up really working with the general counsel there at the time, Stephen Baden, pretty much on a daily basis, which was good and which was not good. The good part was I was getting this great experience, but you know, Stephen is kind of a wonderkind. He's super young, very smart, but he ran it like I was his own personal litigation associate. So I would be working nights. So I was essentially working 2 jobs at once, but it gave me great experience. And he's so well known kind of in the industry and among kind of the legal industry writ large, that it really helped me get my kind of next job at CropLife, where I was assistant general counsel, where I really got to do what I wanted to do, which is focus on, you know, the pesticide industry and the Endangered Species Act, and all of these kind of really tough challenges that have been going on for, at this point, almost 49, 50 years. And now I'm at BASF and I'm a senior counsel there, where I really get a chance to lead the strategy for, I mean, the biggest chemical company in the world on ESA matters, on pesticide matters, and kind of generally regulatory for biotech plants as well. So, I mean, things come full circle, but none of this was planned outside of going to USDA. It just kind of happened. So if I can leave you with any kind of piece of advice, it's just don't be, you know, just be willing to take opportunities even when it may not seem to make sense, because it may come full circle.
Thank you so much. And up next, we're going back to our virtual panelists. So we have Marissa Blackshire, who's the Senior Director of Environmental Compliance and Environmental Health and Safety at Calhoun Energy.
Hello. So Caleb kind of stole my thunder and my theme, which is say yes to everything. That's kind of been the theme of my career thus far. I would also say that if you would have told me this is where I would be, you know, back when I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, I would have been like, what are you talking about? Because I had no idea that I was interested in environmental law, or that it was a career, or that I might be good at it when I first started thinking about becoming a lawyer. So my journey started when I was 5 years old. I was that kid who said, I'm gonna grow up and I'm gonna be a lawyer. And everyone egged me on with you talk a lot and you fight a lot, and that's like the perfect career for you, right? And so I went to law school, and when I went to law school, my plan was that I was gonna be a criminal lawyer, because I had LA district attorneys in my family, and that's what I had seen, and that's what I thought I was gonna be. And I went to the first day of criminal law, and it was a pretty grisly murder case. And I was like, I'm not doing this for the rest of my life. This is absolutely not what I want to do. And so from there, it was kind of like, okay, well, what am I going to do? Like, what other careers are available to me in the law? And I took some environmental and land use courses in law school toward the end, second and third year, and I did really well in them. But I have to tell you, at that time, like, I had no idea that there was a career in that, right? Like, I knew I enjoyed the material, but that was not my experience. I had never seen or met an environmental lawyer. It's not the stuff that's on TV. I was like, okay, this is fun, but what do I do with it? And by happenstance, I ended up getting a job in my third year at a mid-sized law firm and getting placed in their land use and real estate department. And I'm based in California, and being on their land use team, we did all of Walmart's land use and CEQA work, basically from Central California down. And at that time, Walmart was trying to build super centers everywhere. We had a master sites list that was, hundreds of locations. And if you know anything about the California Environmental Quality Act or the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, you know that as part of working through the process of writing those documents, you learn a little bit about a lot of environmental law as well, right? Because those documents cover air, water, waste, historic resources, all of these things. And so while it was primarily a land use position, these were really controversial projects, and I got a taste of some environmental law as well. After I was at that mid-sized firm for about 2 years, I got an opportunity to go to a similarly sized firm in Los Angeles and work for 2 partners that were doing a lot of industrial infrastructure permitting work, but also had a complex air quality compliance practice. And within a week of starting that position, that mid-sized firm merged with Alston & Bird, which is a big law firm. So I went from mid-sized firm to big law firm. I added kind of complex air quality compliance to my practice. And then the recession hit, and it was 2008. And as a big firm lawyer, the only way you were going to keep your job is if you did a little bit of everything and you said yes to any partner that gave you any work. And so during that time, I went from doing, land use CEQA work, air compliance, to doing CERCLA work, doing the California CERCLA analog work, water, waste work, all sorts of things that maybe I didn't think I would do, but that I needed to do in order to keep my job in big law during difficult times. And about 5 years into my tenure at Alston & Bird, one of my first clients at that small law firm, BNSF Railway, posted an in-house environmental legal position that they wanted to staff in the Los Angeles area. And I was in LA, and there aren't a lot of good in-house environmental law positions that come available in the Los Angeles area. So I said, let me throw my hat in the ring. If I hate this, then I could always go back to the law firm. I had great relationships there, but this is just an opportunity to get new skills, get closer to the business and what sort of your legal analysis means to the business and business decisions. And so I went for it. And after being there about 3 years, I went from being, an individual contributor that managed a territory for this large railroad, 28 states, 3 Canadian provinces, and Mexico, to managing the entire environmental legal team. And then my boss asked me to take on a hybrid technical role as well. So in addition to leading the environmental legal team, I managed air and climate programs from a technical standpoint for BNSF. And that was sort of the beginning of, okay, maybe my expertise dictates I could have a non-legal role in a company. And so I spent about 3 years doing that. And then my daughter graduated from high school, and it was the first time in my life that I had the ability to move anywhere. And so I started looking around and, okay, what's the next stage in my career? What do I think I want to do? I started talking to law firms again. I considered whether I wanted to stay at BNSF and perhaps move to Texas for the next stage of my BNSF career. And then this opportunity at an emerging technology company that builds energy solutions came into the mix. And it was a non-legal role to be the senior director of environmental compliance and health and safety. But in talking to them, I could tell that they were a skeleton crew. They had a law department that didn't have an environmental or land use attorney, and that they had a lot of really cool issues that went well with my prior experience and where I thought I could lend a hand. I liked the idea of working on emerging technology and sort of the policy implications of that, and how important it is to use policy to enable emerging technologies. And then also it was an opportunity for me to come into a company that had no environmental compliance programs whatsoever, build an environmental management system. And then also I didn't spend a lot of time earlier in my career working on health and safety. So it was new skills, new tools, this sounds like a great challenge. So I can tell you, I've been here now for 2 years, and it really has been all the things that I thought it was going to be. I've gotten to work on all sorts of really cool issues. I've gotten to, go from working at a large company that had, 40,000 employees to working at a medium-sized teenage company that has 1,700 employees. And I've gotten to see sort of what both things look like. And so, like I said at the beginning, really, if you would have told me this is where I would have ended up, never would have known, but I feel really grateful that I was open and willing to sort of say yes to every opportunity that came up along the way. And here I am in this non-legal role. So I will leave it there, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you so much, Marissa. Up next, we're sticking with virtual panelists, and we have Claudia P. Tibbs, who's the Sustainability Program Manager at Monterey Bay Aquarium.
Thanks, Madison, and hi, everyone. So again, Claudia Pineda Tibbs, I use they, them pronouns, and I'm going to say ditto on what's been said by Alyssa and Caleb and Marissa. Say yes. The caveat I will add is, as your career journey evolves, you'll start to say no, and you will eventually say yes to the things that you are passionate about and that you want to pursue. So, kind of at the beginning, yes, figure out what you want to do, and becomes a lot easier to find out where you want to go after those paths towards yes lead you in the direction that you're heading into, that you might want to stay in for a few years. So I might be one of the only interlopers here because I do not have a career in environmental law, but a lot of my work does focus on compliance, and specifically at Monterey Bay Aquarium, that includes adapting or adopting waste policies, advocating for equitable access for our entire community to participate in ways to decarbonize our business operations. And I actually have training and background in marine and coastal ecology. So I was set to be a scientist. I was set to be out in the tide pools conducting field work. And then I caught the bug of teaching. And 10 years of my career were focused on environmental education and science interpretation. So I taught various age ranges about ocean conservation threats, framed advocacy work around individual and collective action, had experience with marketing and communications, as well as community outreach positions, which is what led me on this pathway that I'm on now, which is all about environmental sustainability. And I like to take a more human twist on environmental sustainability. You might be familiar with the pillars of sustainability, which are people, planet, and profit. But nowadays, those pillars aren't fully able to support the weight of additional pressures rooted in environmental racism and social injustices. So having a vision for sustainability that's transformative, it includes care, respect, and wellness for all, along with a deep responsibility for Earth's living communities, is a way to decolonize sustainability. So centering people, culture, and tradition is something that's really important in other aspects of what I do that intersect with my sustainability and conservation work. I'm going to use conservation in quotes as well. I sit on the board of Latino Outdoors, which is a unique Latinx-led organization working in support of national community, working to support a national community of leaders in outdoor recreation, again, conservation and environmental education. And we do engage in policy issues that are centered around or outdoor access and land conservation. And the reason I've been kind of doing air quotes on the term conservation is because it's a pretty controversial term in itself. The concept of conservation is based on racism and violence and intimidation. Environmental conservation is an embodiment of colonial values where Indigenous communities were forced out of their homes, presented as the enemy, and hardly ever consulted on how the land can be protected. So The way in which I align with policy with Latino Outdoors is providing guidance to the organization, where there's emphasis on access for everybody. And to me, that's extremely important, because opportunities out in nature and in the environment allow one to develop their own environmental identity. And as you develop that environmental identity, you are then propelled to take action as you develop your conservation or your advocacy identity, and are called upon to activate and organize for those intrinsic values that motivate one to care for the environment. I also sit on the Hispanic Access Foundation's Ocean Advisory Council and advise on initiatives like America the Beautiful, also called 30 by 30, which is a national call to action to work collaboratively to conserve and restore land, water, and wildlife that support and sustain the nation, and to pursue the first ever national conservation goal, which is conserve 30% of US lands and waters by 2030. So that's how I got to where I am. Again, saying yes to lots of things, and now being a little bit more picky on what I say yes to. But that's about a little bit about me, and then I will pass it back to Madison. And I also have to leave a little early, so I'll make sure to drop my email in the chat if there are any questions I can help answer after I leave. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Claudia. Next up, we have Addie Romik, a litigation fellow at NRDC.
Thanks, Madison. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with such an impressive group. So as Madison said, my name is Addie, and I'm a fellow on NRDC's litigation team, which is a 3-year position for sort of early career attorneys. And so our team is a fairly small part of a large organization. NRDC has, I think now, nearly 700 employees across the country and in China and India. And the place is lousy with lawyers who do all kinds of things. But there's a team of 40 lawyers and paralegals who only litigate across issue areas, which is really, really neat, I think. And so a lot of the time our cases come from within NRDC. The NRDC health program will say, hey, EPA is about to promulgate this drinking water regulation we don't like, and we're going to sue. And our team will say, we have capacity to represent you in that case. And some of our cases we develop ourselves based on ideas members of our team have, or we work with outside partners to develop cases as well. And I'd say our litigation docket falls into 2 main categories. A lot of our cases are sort of these classic Administrative Procedure Act cases where we're challenging a regulation that we think should be broadly more protective in various ways. And our other half are cases against individual polluting facilities, or sometimes local governments or others, and those tend to be sort of enforcement discovery-based cases. So we have this really long-running case about mercury pollution in the Penobscot River in Maine that's been going on since the 90s. We won settlements in Flint and Newark to enforce the Safe Drinking Water Act limits for lead, so cases like that. So those cases are a lot more resource intensive, so we do fewer of them, but they take probably a lot more of our time. So I'm happy to talk more about that in detail, but that's sort of a broad overview of our work. And for how I got here, I think for a lot of people, like a lot of people on this panel, I sort of grew up with a big interest in environmental issues and liked being outdoors. When I got to college, I got really interested in like science and technology policy and thinking about the politics of science and how do you make good policy when there's disagreements about what the science is, or when the communication gets skewed. And through taking a couple classes in college, I realized that sort of the environmental field is like just, it's all about that. Like, how do you make good policy when you're also trying to do good science, and these things get politicized. And so after college, I lucked into a job at the National Wildlife Federation, which is another environmental NGO, and I was based here in DC, and then actually started as a paid internship and then turned into a permanent position. And I stayed there for 3 years on the government affairs team. So I was supporting a team of lobbyists and doing some lobbying myself. And it was a fantastic opportunity to sort of see the how different NGOs work together, how different environmental groups specialize. It was a real crash course in environmental policy, working on land use issues and climate change and Endangered Species Act stuff. And through that process, I realized I did not want to be a lobbyist. I just was not good at it. And I did want to be a lawyer. And the reason I decided that is because the people I saw in my field who got to really engage deeply in these policy issues and sort of decide what we were going to be advocating for were often lawyers. And the other piece of that is that I had this job from 2012 to 2015 during the second Obama administration. Waxman-Markey had died, which was the cap and trade bill in the Senate, and the Clean Power Plan and there's the Water to Gas rule were both happening. And so all this focus was on the administrative process, and it seemed like that's where exciting environmental work was happening. And to understand that process, I decided I wanted to go to law school. And so I went to law school. Didn't really had a vague idea that I would return to the environmental nonprofit world as a lawyer, but I wasn't quite sure in what role. And I'd say pretty early on in law school, I became really interested in litigation, which frankly, I didn't really know what that meant before law school. I didn't grow up with lawyers in my family, but I really liked 1L civil procedure. And people told me, well, if you like that, you're gonna love litigation. And spoiler alert, still a huge part of my job. I'm still surprised by how much. And I had interned my 1L summer for my current team at NRDC through a total fluke. And once I kind of discovered that job exists where I could specialize in litigation, but not have to pick an environmental issue, I knew I really wanted to do that if I could. So I also tried out government work during law school. I interned for DOJ and the New York Attorney General's office and really enjoyed that. I did several clinics, not environmental law clinics, which I definitely am really glad I did. I did a civil practice clinic and got real experience representing clients, which was just invaluable to learn how to build those relationships. And then also I did a appellate clinic, and actually randomly we had a Clean Air Act case, which was really fun. But even without that, it was really great skill building. And that's sort of one piece of advice I have, especially if you want to litigate, is that you have your whole career to specialize in environmental law, but and learning those litigation skills is really transferable, even if it feels like what you're doing is totally unrelated. And so after law school, I ended up clerking for 2 years. I'd seen a lot of the people I'd met who were environmental litigators had clerked, and everyone recommended it. And when I was in law school, I applied after my first summer, which was ridiculously early, and thankfully that has changed under the current hiring plan. But so I knew as early as my 2L year that I was going to be clerking for 2 years, and that gave me some breathing room to kind of wait a little bit until after graduation to start applying for jobs. And so I spent 1 year clerking for a district court and 1 year for a court of appeals. I'm happy to talk more about that if anyone's interested in clerking. I did not do any environmental law for 2 years, which I knew was likely going in based on where I clerked. My district court judge did have one criminal case under the Lacey Act for someone who smuggled turtles to Canada. That was the closest I got to environmental law for 2 years. But I learned a ton. It was a fantastic experience, and I'm really glad I did it. And then about fall of 2019, I started applying for jobs, and I applied. The nice thing about coming right out of law school or looking for that first job is everything's sort of on the same cycle. So I was able to apply to sort of a chunk of fellowships and government positions at once, and ended up getting my current job. And I'm now in year 2 of a 3-year program, and I'm really loving it. It's been great. So I'll leave it there, but happy to speak more about anything.
Thank you so much. And then last but certainly not least, we have Elise, a principal at Beverage and Diamond.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elise Constantinidi. I am a principal at Beverage and Diamond, which is a leading environmental law firm. I'm thrilled to be here at ELI. And to be honest, I have not been an environmental lawyer for very long. Prior to November, I was a federal prosecutor, and I had not tried a single environmental law case. So I am also going to be furthering the theme of say yes to everything and stay open, because that really sums up my career. So I went into law school like a lot of people, and I think I've heard this from a few other panelists, kind of imagining what my career was going to be. I watched a lot of Law and Order. And so, of course, I thought I was going to be a prolific trial attorney. I wanted to be Jack McCoy. That is not realistic at all. But of course, you're 22 years old, and what else do you know? I graduated in 2010 and I was a victim of the Great Recession. Lawyers were having their offers rescinded. I had wanted to work. I graduated from a Boston law school, so I thought I was going to be in the Suffolk County DA's office. That did not come to fruition. And so, like another panelist, I ended up contracting for a while. And you go from thinking you're going to be this prolific trial attorney to sitting and clicking relevancy buttons on documents. It is a little bit of a career killer. You think it is, but in hindsight, I found it very helpful because it gave me time to start making a career plan and start focusing on what it was I wanted to do. And I think that that's very important. We don't need to know exactly where we're going to end up, but if you have a general idea of some of the skills that you want to learn, it makes it easier to start focusing and networking. That is also something I heard from some panelists, and that has rung so true for myself. So I did want to go do trial work. And so what I started to do was go to panels much like these and listen to folks speak. And I was very interested in the federal government. So I started going to DOJ panels. And it was one on national security. And so I asked some panelist questions, and afterwards, one of the audience members actually came up to me and said, it's not directly on national security, but just so you know, there are these fellowship programs. They're unpaid. So a lot of people are unable to take them, but you get just unparalleled experience in the government. And it can be a good way to get some exposure, because back at that point, the government was on a hiring freeze, especially DOJ. It was impossible to get a job there. So I took her card, I emailed her, and she gave me some options, and one of which was a fellowship program at the United States Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia. So I applied, I went through several rounds of interviews, and then I was ultimately offered the fellowship. And it was a leap of faith because it was an unpaid 7-month fellowship and you had to make the commitment. And I was terrified. To go without an income for that long is a hardship, especially for somebody saddled with student loan debts. But it was something I had really, really wanted to do. And I trusted this individual who told me it was going to be a really good choice and it was going to pay off. So I entered into the United States Attorney's Office. I worked in their misdemeanor section. I worked my butt off for those 7 months. I networked. I met everybody I could. I showed them I was very interested. And so the funny story is, my first day, you have to do these bench trials. And they're quick little theft cases in front of a judge. I couldn't even give an opening statement. I was so nervous. I was shaking like a leaf and I was reading a police report. By the end, I was finally getting my sea legs. I was in the well of the court, impeaching witnesses. And I felt for the first time that I was doing what I really enjoyed, which is litigating and to be a trial attorney. So back then, you had to exit the United States Attorney's Office for 6 months before you could get a full-time job. So I left, I went back to contracting. In 6 months to the day that I left, I got a call from the US Attorney, Ron Manchin at the time, who told me to apply. So clearly I had left an indelible mark, and I was remembered, and I was very, very fortunate because I was hired right away. And then I worked there for 7 years. I started as a line attorney, so I was just taking cases. And then I moved to be a supervisor. We were called deputy chiefs, and I supervised 2 units, our early case assessment unit, which decided, which cases were going to be brought from the office. We would get probable cause arrests or warrants, and we would decide what we would go forward on. And then I also supervised the gun and drug trial unit. We just had a write-up in the Post yesterday about it, very controversial. So that was difficult for me because of some of the racial issues that have always been present, but I think that now the general public, after George Floyd, have become more aware of. These were things I struggled with personally, and that is why I've actually made the change in my career, because as much as I loved being a prosecutor, and I think you can tell by my enthusiasm for my story, and I feel like I did do a lot of good and I did deliver justice, there were a lot of aspects of that job I found troubling. Number one, the subject matter. I think somebody talked about a horrific murder case in their law school. I tried murder cases. It just sticks with you. And then again, some of the racial aspects as a person of color, began to just weigh very heavily on myself and some other colleagues. We actually wrote a letter to our front office in 2020 asking for some changes. Some of it was adopted, most of it was not. There are reasons for it. I'm not going to sit here and kind of, and speak badly about my former office, but for me, it was time to go. It was a little too much. And then January 6th happened, and that was it. I ended up getting stuck in that melee. That's a story for another time. I was there in my official capacity and I was stuck at the Capitol. And that's when I said, it's time to go. So I had these skills. And again, someone mentioned transferable skills. I was a litigator, a trial attorney, and I needed to know what was next. And I knew a lot of folks in the ag field and then also in the environmental law field. One of them just happens to be one of your panelists today. Hello, Caleb. And they had been telling me about their careers for years. And it was fascinating. And it just seemed like such a diverse career field. And they always seemed excited about it. And I wanted to learn more. And so I started having conversations with these people around me. And I realized environmental law is really an umbrella term. And it encompasses a lot of things. A lot of folks will think it's just regulatory, but what I learned very quickly is that there's a space for litigators like myself. And now more than ever, my skills are in demand because the Biden administration is ramping up a lot of enforcement actions. There used to be this focus on compliance and let's let companies kind of come into compliance on their own. And now there's more of an enforcement paradigm where they're saying, you know what, we've tried to let them come into compliance on their own. Now we're going to do enforcement actions and we're going to kind of hold them accountable for them to come into compliance because it wasn't working. It was a little bit, it was different under the Trump administration, obviously. Some of these swings were very lax, but the Biden administration has definitely shifted their focus. And they actually just opened a new office of environmental justice. They announced it last week. And so they are very, very committed. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the environmental law space. I knew somebody who knew Ben Wilson, who at the time was the chairman of my firm, Beveridge and Diamond, which is a leading firm in environmental law. So I thought, great, just like the mentor I had early on in my career, who helped me into DOJ, I figured Ben knows everybody. He'll tell me what I need to do to get into this space. Because I thought it was going to take about a year to start, networking, learning. Just so happens, having this conversation with Ben, they were looking to expand their white collar practice. They had an opening for a federal prosecutor because Beveridge and Diamond works hard to attract former government attorneys. It was founded by the first EPA administrator. So they like having folks lateral in from the government to have those special relationships. And so it was kismet. It happened to work out. And I said, but Ben, I don't have any environmental law experience. And I was very honest in all my interviews. And what they said was, in my practice, which is the white collar practice, kind of environmental crimes and investigations, we're generalists. So we don't need the specialized subject matter that our regulatory attorneys have, right? We're lawyers, we know how to research the law. A lot of what I do is very similar to what I did as a prosecutor, except I'm on the other side. I'm now defending some of these criminal actions, or I'm helping out. There's a grand jury subpoena. We know the company is under investigation and we need to comply with these subpoenas, but at the same time, we need to talk to the government and, come to a quick resolution, right? So my skills were immediately transferable, and B&D is full of subject matter experts. So I feel like I go to school all the time with my colleagues. They teach me. I have two very interesting cases, one being Clean Air Act, one being Clean Water Act. They teach me about the technical aspects, and then I know the legal standards, right? So I can go in and already explain to a client kind of what their exposure is based upon what the government is going to have to prove in trial. And having been a prosecutor, I know what that really means. Is it going to be beyond a reasonable doubt? I find it very helpful, and the clients are finding it helpful because I used to sit in that chair. And again, I told you this is coming around. I was head of the case assessment section. So I know what a prosecutor's thinking, and the clients appreciate that. And meanwhile, I'm learning a new field of law, which is so diverse, I'm not getting bored. And coming from the United States Attorney's Office, that was my fear. Will I get bored? But there's just so much to this field that I feel like I could finish my career here and never get bored. And also with my social justice concerns and some of the things that had run me out of my previous office, I'm now able to address in this role. We have a very robust environmental justice practice. We call it our EJ practice group. It has been run for a long time, even before EJ really came to the forefront of people's consciousness and have been spoken about the way it is now. So they already have a lot of experience working on these EJ tools, working with the EPA and the clients. And again, what we're doing is we're counseling companies to come into compliance. You know, it's not as much we're defending enforcement actions, it's that we're going in and saying, you have a potential problem. We've done these investigations and it is negatively impacting this community. Here's what we can do to try to prevent some of those negative impacts. And companies are listening. You know, it's not everything we see on the movies where you have just greedy companies. I'm sure they exist too, but I'm happy to say that our clients generally and genuinely want to limit their impact in that area, and they do want to come in compliance, and they don't want to adversely affect some of these communities of color, or if they want to then reverse some of their negative impacts. And so I feel good about what I'm doing, and so I've landed in a place that I can honestly say I'm happy and I'm excited to be in. And so it's a weird career path to bring me here. But I think that the bottom line is always stay open. If you start in one field, you don't necessarily need to end there. Okay. A lot of skills are transferable, and keep checking in with yourself and making sure you're happy. Because I think the professor mentioned golden handcuffs. Yes, that does happen. But you do have a choice. And get out there and network. I wouldn't be where I am today if I had not networked and had the wonderful mentors that I had. And so if you are a law student or you are someone who has just recently graduated, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to go and build that networking, that network, and get out there and really tell folks what you want to do, because you'd be surprised about how many people really do want to help you.
Thank you so much, Elise. We will now move on for about the next half an hour to prepare roundtable discussions that we have from ELI, mostly discussing all of these common themes you've heard in our panelist presentations. So I'm going to start us off with those. All of you here in person and virtually, just feel free to answer whichever ones you feel comfortable with. So to get started, most of our audience today is students and new lawyers. We have some undergraduates, we have some law students, and then of course some people who are already practicing. But I think everyone hopefully is here because they're interested in the field of environmental law. So what is one thing that you wish you had known about the field when you were first starting to practice?
I have something. So I think a lot of times, well, there are going to be other people on this panel that disagree with me on this, but I think a lot of times people think that you need to have some background in math or science to be a really good environmental lawyer. And I would say that where school was concerned, I was math and science averse, and I thought I hated those things. And somehow I've managed in the practical to develop a really great environmental law practice. And so what I'd say about that, and the reason why I think that works, is I think a lot of times as an environmental lawyer, your job is to sort of be the bridge between the technical and the masses, right? And so if you have the ability to break things down and break concepts down in a way that the masses can understand, that's kind of like your superpower in this profession. And so I just say, don't be intimidated by math and science or the idea that you need to love them or have some background in them to have success in this field.
Contribute one thing is just understanding what lawyers really do. I didn't come from a background where I grew up with lawyers. My older brother did become a lawyer, so I did have somebody a little ahead of me. And it wasn't until like he handed me a brief that I really, you saw people on TV, they just walk into courtrooms, they argue cases, and it's like, oh wow. And he handed me a brief, and so I'm like sitting there reading this thing and thinking, oh, So like you really like you go out and you research this stuff and you write it down. So I think really trying to get more of that sense as to what do lawyers really do day to day? What does their day look like? What kinds of things do they write? What kinds of things do they read? What kinds of issues do they follow? People now have a big advantage that I didn't have in the 80s. We didn't have as much access to things because we didn't have the internet. So I would just urge you to, get out and really get your hands around what people are doing.
Anyone else have any advice? Any of our in-person people? Go on to the second question.
I can add a little bit to what Marissa was saying in terms of courses, and I'll take you on a journey real quick, but it might be helpful also because just the world of anything relating to the environment can get wonky at times. And as you start to enter into that field, I would suggest aligning with one of your local museums or science centers just to see how they're interpreting that information. Surprisingly enough, over 35% of the public sees museums and science centers as trusted messengers of information, and they can, attribute that to museums being nonpartisan or neutral. So it might be helpful just to see how things are being interpreted from the public sector. A lot of times it's these subtle ways in which language is being used where it doesn't feel like there should be a direct call to action, or the types of ways in which people are identified or positioned to do something. And museums are really good at breaking those silos down. A lot of times the public doesn't trust scientists. So being able to have a different way of expressing or communicating information might be helpful.
I just wanted to add that, in this field, it's important to have a diverse set of skills and diversity of experiences. I once spoke to an attorney who was a firefighter, and actually her background as a firefighter actually helped her in her day-to-day in her profession. So, you might think that it is not relevant, your previous experiences, but it is, and you will see it. You will come up with an issue that you might think, oh, I know this, because of some past work that I did. So experiences are meaningful, and variety of experiences are really meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And that kind of leads us into the second question we have, which is one really neat aspect of environmental law is I think you all have noticed probably how diverse it is and how wide it is in scope. And there are a lot of different directions you can go that are related to environmental law, as you can see from our panelists here. So how do you all recommend specializing in a specific field within environmental law?
Don't. No, I'm sorry. I talked a little bit about this in my career journey. When I took my first in-house job at BNSF, there were a lot of people that were a lot more senior than me in my area who also applied for that job. And the reason why I got it as a more junior person is because they needed generalists. They needed people that had done everything under the environmental and really land use umbrella. And I was the person as a younger attorney who was working in big law and taking whatever I could get that had done a little bit of everything. And that's how I was able to get a really great job. And I think that's how a lot of people are able to get a really great job. So, I can understand when I sit down and think about what I am, I'm a SQL lawyer. That's what I started doing. But in real life, I can do almost anything. And that's really important because, like you say, this is a very diverse field, and there's not a lot of people that just need somebody to do one very specific thing.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I totally agree with Marissa. At my firm, most of our attorneys have multiple practices. Again, some of them can say, yes, this is my core practice, but they do take on many cases or work with different clients, counseling on different areas of the law. And I think it is incredibly helpful, not just for different career pursuits, but then it also keeps you sharp, right? Because you have to think about issues from different angles. And sometimes there are multiple environmental issues in kind of one set of facts that if you're only thinking, oh, perhaps this is just a Clean Water Act, and you turn out that, some things are pollutants are in the air, now it's a Clean Air Act. And I think it's very important that everybody kind of get their feet wet in different areas, and then you can also find something you enjoy and then choose to focus on that, because there's so many different things to do. You may not have even been exposed to what it is that really gets you excited.
Yeah, this sort of relates to a question that somebody had put into the chat early on, and I answered by typing, but share with others. Really, you're trying to sort through. I mean, I agree with the points. As I was saying before, you have to be a good lawyer, first of all, which means you need a broad set of skills. I agree with the points that, being a generalist matters. You have to sort of be able to see big pictures. You need to be able to see connections. You have to realize this isn't just this issue. It's got these pieces. But there is also that point where you do probably want to have something that you're particularly good at. And as a student, when you're sitting there and you're looking at this and you're looking at energy and environment, and there's so many different things, how do I pick? And again, this goes to, do you just try to take every course that's offered at your law school? No, don't. You're going to spend a lot of time pursuing a lot of things that probably you're giving up chances to do other things. But I would kind of think about it in layers. Think first about, how do I go out there, get more information from people. I attended career panels like this. GW Law we have a series of career videos up. Go to other types of panels, talk to people, go to events, ask people what they do. Read the news. What the kinds of things get you excited? Which ones are you really interested in following and knowing what happens next in that case? So look at that sort of broad thing and then begin focusing more. Go for informational interviews. Read some of the briefs in some of the cases that you find interesting. Again, is this something you could spend your time doing? Marissa mentioned the science background or math background, in my case, economics, engineering. Some people really click, and it doesn't matter. I don't have any background, by the way, in science, math, or engineering, only in economics. But sometimes it really clicks for you and sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay, but something will. So keep looking, keep exploring, keep reading, go that next layer deeper. And then when you think you've got it, okay, I'd like to know a little bit more about wildlife law and air law, then take those courses. Or go to the events that are more focused on those areas and dig in that way. So kind of just keep thinking of it as narrowing down a little. Don't lose sight of the big picture, but do find those areas where you have some special interest and some special passion that you'll bring to that job. And then you'll also be able to handle the other things too.
I echo all of that. I'll just add that one thing that's been helpful for me is thinking about different ways to specialize. So I think a lot of environmental lawyers specialize in subject matter, like they're Clean Air Act lawyers or they're climate lawyers. You can also specialize in a skill set, like you can be a litigator or a compliance lawyer, or we have in-house counsel at our organization who help make sure we don't mess up our nonprofit status. So there's like kind of thinking about, and sometimes you can specialize in both of those. I'm a litigator, only does Clean Air Act enforcement or things like that, but sort of thinking about specialization in these different buckets. It's something I found useful.
Any more comments on this question? All right, well, I'm going to kind of shift directions a little bit, but this is also something that has come up quite a bit in all of your presentations, is mentorship. So what role did mentorship play in your legal journey, and how can law students and new lawyers find mentors?
I can get us started. So mentors did play, and when I was starting out, and still play a fundamental role in my legal career. Reaching out to professors, going to networking events, reaching out to your supervisor at an internship or a clerkship always works. Asking questions, reaching people via LinkedIn and writing message and connecting with them is a great way to find good mentors. And also, like a panelist said, informational interviews as well. You'll be surprised, like it was said, how people want to be helpful and how people, are willing to share their experiences if you just ask. You don't, you can't be afraid of asking.
Yeah, I want to echo that sentiment about just asking. I think two other people on this panel mentioned Ben Wilson. I'll be the third to say that he's had a really important place in my career, really informally. It's like kind of remarkable how he can develop a relationship with so many different individuals and remember their kids and their lives when he sees them, because it's everyone, right? Like how many of us are on this panel, and at least 3 of us have said his name, right? And so I would say me, having that been sort of a model of mentorship, I have never said no to anyone who's reached out to me on LinkedIn or emailed me, or if they're in my vicinity, asked me to go to lunch. And so really just be open and willing to ask. And most people that you meet on these sort of panels or at events are more than willing to talk to you and provide you mentorship in a variety of different ways.
I agree with all of those things. I would also just say that some of the deepest mentorship relationships happen more naturally. Someone sees you doing good work and they end up being sort of mutually beneficial relationships. Maybe you're helping that person gain some insights that they wouldn't otherwise have. And that's why they really enjoy sitting down and talking to you and sharing with you their knowledge and their assistance. And as I said, the mentor, I define a mentor as somebody who has your interests at heart, but who also just has different experiences than you. So it might be that person who's 2 generations ahead of you, or it might be that person who's kind of maybe a colleague from law school that just has different experiences, and you mentor each other in terms of helping yourselves along. So don't think too narrowly about a mentorship as like, oh, just that senior person who agrees to have coffee with me twice a month. Those relationships are great, but there's other ones.
Excuse me, Madison. I have to leave, but please feel free to reach out to me via email. So thank you so much. My apologies.
And also a common question that comes up when we talk about mentorship too is, do you all think it's better to find careers within your firm or organization, to find mentors within there or outside of your workplace?
I guess I'll say something. I would say probably a little bit of both. Some issues that you have are within your organization, and some are kind of broader issues or things that you just want to test pilot. So my last position, I look at my old supervisor as a very good mentor, but when I was looking to leave, probably not the best person to talk to about kind of where I should go, or should I go in-house or firm or back to the government, right, when you're doing that. So I think you probably want a bit of both, just so you can get all sides, all points of view. I like to get various points of view when I'm making a decision. And a lot of the decisions you'll make, especially early in your career, some can be, critical, or at least kind of put you on the right path towards kind of your end result. But I would say just having kind of a number of people inside and outside of your organization to talk to about specific things. And some people may be better at, I think one of the things I learned over time is that some people may be good at giving advice specifically on, law firms, right? They're the best person you could ever talk to about how you should succeed at in the law firm, but may not be good for in-house or a government practice. And I think that can go both ways.
you. We can also kind of talk about networking because they're pretty related. So how has networking affected your career? And at ELI, at least we get this question a lot, which is what networking advice do you have in our current legal world in light of the recent pandemic and social distancing and all of that?
I can answer this as someone who hates networking, at least as traditionally defined, and probably pretty bad at it. I think networking is really the same. It's just being a good colleague and keeping relationships with people. Like, I don't enjoy, or I don't, I like networking reception where you're trying to go around and meet a lot of different people. That's not an arena in which I particularly thrive. So I don't do that. Some people are great at that and make great relationships that way. And if that works for you, I encourage it. In the Zoom world, I don't know, it's tough. But I think for me, I've tried to focus on, there's one supervisor I really connected with an internship. I'm going to force myself to get lunch with that person once a year. And that's a low bar, and just maintaining that kind of relationship with just a few key people or a few people who are a few years ahead of me in my law school who've been really helpful to me, things like that. So just trying to focus on, I guess, quality over quantity has worked well for me. And then also your peers are your network, your law school peers, people you intern with, your co-clerks, and just sort of catching up with a friend can be networking, and that's great.
And I can echo that. Just about your peers being your network. A very, very good friend of mine, before I left my old position, was up for partner at her firm, and I was able to give her, great lawyer, but I was able to give her a case, and really that kind of pushed her over the hump to make partner, because she was able to show that she brought in actual corporate client, but just that keeping the relationships even with people who may not be, 15 years or 10 years ahead of you, but really your peers. I tell people all the time, your law school colleagues are your network to a certain extent, and being, as kind of corny as it sounds, likable and just a generally decent person will take you a very long way in your career. And a lot of times, especially as you get more senior in your career, it's we all know many people can do the work. It's kind of more, how's your attitude, how's your character, and things like that will kind of take you a lot further, really, than kind of the suits model, or the generic, I'm a lawyer, I'm a terrible person, but a very good lawyer attitude.
Even though we all hate social media to some extent, it actually does have its benefits. It gives you that ability to sort of keep up. Somebody gets a new job, you know about it, you send a little note of congratulations. Those kinds of things actually do matter. My funniest story about getting business related to a purse. I was at a proceeding with someone else's client, and she admired my purse, and then called me a couple months later to tell me she had found one just like it. And the two of us had to start this conversation, and she sent me some work. So, again, networking is kind of, not all of it has that direct of a payoff. But networking is I also don't like the cocktail thing, but just think of it as, as Caleb was saying, being a good person, reaching out, saying congratulations to people when they do something good, looking at what they do, being interested.
I want to add something here. So I consider myself to be sort of an introverted extrovert. I think a lot of lawyers are that way, right? And so none of us really love that cocktail ballroom setting. One thing that's been really, really helpful for me is joining organizations like ELI, the ABA SEER section, your local bar association, and volunteering to do work, potentially leading a committee, being on a committee, and working your way through leadership in those sorts of organizations translate to meeting a lot of people and building a network that can be sort of national in scale without really trying too hard. Just showing up to a conference, try as you might, if you're somewhere for 3 days with a whole bunch of environmental lawyers, chances are, even if you don't like that cocktail reception or dinner, that you're gonna meet at least 3-5 people that you can add to your network. So I'm a big advocate for, finding creative ways like that to meet people and network.
And I just want to add one thing, and it goes on to what the professor said about, the purse conversation. It's never forecast somebody's value in your life. And that also goes to what Caleb said, just be a good person, because you don't know who you're talking to. And you also don't know when, it'll come back around and they may need you, or vice versa. And so the person who introduced me to Ben Wilson had no connection to environmental law. And mind you, I know a lot of environmental lawyers, but it was just somebody, and we were chatting and said, you know what, I know this great guy. I think you need you need to talk to. And then I looked up and like, Beverage and Diamond. Oh yes, I need to talk to this person. So just treat everybody equally like a decent human being, and if somebody wants to engage with you and you have the time, engage with them. You just never know. I mean, it's just good karma in general, but it could pay off later as well. So just keep that in mind, especially it's true for everyone, but especially those of you who are just starting out, even if you're just chatting somebody up at a coffee shop, I'm telling you, you truly don't know.
All right, so in about 8 minutes, we'll start taking audience questions. So just a reminder, I can see there's some in the Q&A right now, but if you have any questions and you're watching virtually, now is the time to put them in. I'm going to kind of just go into one last area of our prepared questions. So a lot of people get involved with environmental work because they want to make a difference. And I wanted to ask you all how you feel you can make a difference in kind of different areas of law, because nonprofit is where people tend to aim for, but then I feel like in every area you all are talking about, you can make a difference. So is there a way that you found is a really good way to get into it?
I have a stump speech on this because I've always worked for industry. And so I strongly believe, particularly, if you have an interest in environmental justice, that we need amazing people on all sides of these issues, right? So we need great people working for community groups. We need great people working for companies. We need great people working in law firms and government, et cetera, right? And I think there is a misconception that most companies in this world don't want to do the right thing. We're at a time in this world where most companies want to do more than the right thing, right? And they need diverse people and diverse perspectives in the room to hold that mirror up and get them to do the right thing, where there are some of those choices on the margins. And so I always say, like, when you get really good at this, you figure out how to make those, win-win cases for your leadership. It's really easy to effectuate a lot of really meaningful change, even if you're not working for a community group or a nonprofit. I would posit potentially in some circumstances, you have the ability to affect more change. And so I encourage everybody, we talked a lot about being open. Even if that's ultimately what you think you want to do, if you want to go work at NRDC, you can get a lot of skills not working for NRDC while you're waiting for that perfect job to come up. So be open to gaining those skills elsewhere if you have to, if you don't get the amazing opportunity to go work for the group you want to. And then also understand that there's still the opportunity to do really, really meaningful work. So.
I mean, I'll echo that. Being able to work for an industry, working at a trade association that represents the industry, and just having issues that's been around the industry, and me being kind of, I would just say a new face, definitely one of the first, pretty sure the first Black person ever to be at Prop Life America in a senior position. Really, I was able to give another perspective on issues that have been around for years, for decades, honestly. And people literally saying, I've never thought about it that way. And to me, it just came naturally because that was my different perspective. So I think you're absolutely right when you're saying you can effectuate change in that manner. And I do think that's important, especially if you're coming from industry. And that's the one thing I do somewhat miss about government, because if you are in a good position in the government, and Elise can speak to that, you can really effectuate change in a very meaningful way if you have the authority. Now, the other side of the government is, depending on who's in charge, you may not be able to do anything, right? So it kind of goes both ways. But I think if you have the backing of a big company or a company that wants to do something, you can really kind of make some things happen that are, you know, like you said, the win-win. That's good for the company, that's good for the industry, but also good for the NGOs, ENGOs, and also that's kind of the right thing to do. And I think we're getting more comfortable as kind of big industry doing some of the things that are the right thing to do, and we don't have to be. I think in the past, people were so stuck by, we don't want to look like the losers, or we always want to get the biggest win. But now there's a possibility where we can get win-wins and also do something that's just like generally good, you know, which I think was somewhat of a foreign concept.
I'd just like to, I agree with everything that Marissa and Caleb said, but to add on to that, there's now such a growing movement towards ESG, or environmental social governance principles, being incorporated into what corporations do. Just recently was running a conference on nuclear law, but someone was talking about investment, mentioned that the UN's principles of responsible investment, as of sometime in like 2021, had nearly 4,000 companies who had signed on to it, and that was about $104 trillion. So, you know, thinking about if you're in one of those companies and they're thinking, how do I hit these metrics? And there's all kinds of different standards, so not all of them are quite the same. But if you think about how do you hit those metrics, it really matters to have people in the company. Among one of the things that they look at is cognitive diversity. So not just diversity of color, race, et cetera, but also are the people in the company who think differently, who ask questions, who push. And so as you're thinking about your career, I know I have a lot of students who feel like, oh, I care deeply about the environment. The only place I can go is to an NGO. I have to fight against big corporations. It's like, well, maybe, but you can still have your principles and take them with you where you are. And a lot of laws, or sometimes, you know, what the government decides to promulgate isn't always maybe the best thing. As I said, there's always this balance: human welfare, economics, the planet, you know, health of many different species and people have to be considered. And so sometimes the best decisions really do come when you have that industry talking to government, talking to the NGOs, all those voices coming together. And so as Marissa was saying, you need good people on all sides. You don't get to the right decisions without that. So I would say don't pick sides, think about what is important to you and figure out where you can do that, but don't feel like it has to be within a certain category.
Right. Well, thank you all so much for participating in these roundtable discussion questions. I think it was really valuable for our audience, but I do want to give time for our audience to ask questions. So I'm going to first turn to our in-person audience. Does anyone here have a question they want to ask our panel? Yeah, go ahead. And Chandler's going to come with the microphone.
I've had a number of attorneys who I look up to who have talked about the value that they got out of a clerkship experience, either with an ALJ or an arbitrary judge. And I really appreciate the advice they give, but I also feel like a number of them don't properly understand the urgency of the climate crisis and what it means to be spending a few years not in the fight. So I'm wondering from all of you, if you have advice and thoughts about, given that the timeline to avert the worst of the climate crisis is rapidly shrinking, how we can train ourselves during our careers.
I can take that one. I mean, I think the climate crisis is going to be there in a year, I'm sorry to say. So I think that's a really personal choice. I mean, I had lots of friends in environmental law and other public interest careers who like knew they were not going to be happy taking any time out of direct services or direct advocacy. I think, and clerking can give you some real moral dilemmas, even if it's a judge you're mostly in agreement with. I mean, I found working on criminal law cases really challenging. And there's just, and saw co-clerks struggle with different cases in different ways, and you do sort of have to set aside your personal values in a way that you don't always as an advocate. Although all lawyers have to do that to a certain extent because you're representing a client. So I think, as a nonprofit lawyer representing your own organization, you're most likely to sort of be advocating in sync with your own values, but that's not always true. So, I think choosing to be a lawyer is always choosing to maybe have to advocate someone else's position. So yeah, I'm glad I made a choice to take some time out. I think I'm my first year out of law school. I'm not sure how much I would have contributed to the climate movement, especially because there's a lot of people doing the work and willing to do the work. I think I was able to start contributing at a higher level when I started litigating, having clerked for 2 years. But I also know many people who didn't clerk and hit the ground running and are fantastic lawyers. So I think it's just a really personal choice.
Hi, thank you all so much. So I go to school in Louisiana, which is sort of not famous for its environmental policy. And I'm wondering if you all have any advice, you kind of touched on it, just talking about the difference between sort of the Obama and Trump administration. And I think it's sort of similar, obviously, at the state level. But if you have any advice for going into a job market where it's not necessarily supported by the administration of the state, and whether or not that means turning towards nonprofit orgs, or whether that can most easily fluctuated through sort of how you were talking about the market side of things, and whether or not those are the people really holding the waters in that sort of situation.
That's a great question. And I think when I joined USD, I thought I was going to be working for Hillary Clinton, like I assume most people thought was probably going to happen. But that did not happen. But I will say that I likely would not be here if Donald Trump had not won. And that's just because, you had problems getting in people into position and things like that. So that allowed other people to be elevated within the agency. So, I mean, for me, that meant I was working with the general counsel, of a major agency on a daily basis. As I don't know how, maybe 26 or 27 at the time. So, and you got a chance to do very big things, right? When you work for the government, you can do, work on massive cases kind of by yourself. So I was young in my career, but working on, $100 million cases and things like that, and making major policy decisions that affect, the entire country. And to some extent in my head, I'm asking, are they setting me up to fail or be in front of a congressional hearing, right? Because this work seems like it's too senior for me, but especially if you're fortunate enough to get a good boss, like I was, you're really able to do a lot of the big work that you just won't be able to do at other places, right? Even now, in my position now, if I had, an $800 million case like at USDA on government contracts, it would have to go through kind of a series of reviews and people would be looking at it. But at my previous job at USDA, they're just like, well, you figure it out. It'll be fine, right? Which is kind of a tough way to learn, but it is a good way to really great experience if you're willing to kind of be bold and take risks. There is some advantage in even working, especially at a state agency where there's still some controls put in for even groups that you don't necessarily align with personally, just because oftentimes you'll get really good experience and you'll understand what the goals are of various groups of people, right? I think that's one of the things I brought to my current position, that I've been able to bring in kind of the views of various groups of NGOs. What I didn't say about my experience is that I was a research assistant for Patrice Sims, who's I'm sure people at ELI, but he was also the transition lead for the Biden administration for EPA, right? So I was able to bring in that kind of knowledge of the NGOs, what they're looking for. So I would say be open to kind of working with, maybe it's the Democratic Party or Republican Party, or, Louisiana, it may be some other party that's unique to Louisiana, but, really just kind of be open. And if you can get in a good job where you're going to get experience doing big things, then I would say go for it. As long as you're not kind of really in some kind of personal anguish, but it's kind of cool to get to do big things at a young point in your career.
So I'm not sure if I heard the question right, just because it's a bit muffled over the microphone for the virtual panelists. But if I understood the question to be, if I'm not aligned with what the state organizations or state administration is aligned with, should I still attempt to get a job there, or should I do it through industry? Was that kind of the gist of the question? If it was, and I could say, from my experience, I worked at DOJ during the Trump administration. And, now I can say, because I don't work there anymore, that my views were not aligned with those initiatives. And it depends on what kind of impact you're okay with making. I mean, and I agree with you, Caleb, I mean, you can get fantastic experiences, when you're joining in a position where perhaps a lot of people aren't joining. And that is important, because you are able to advance in your career faster, and you face a lot of challenging scenarios that you have to overcome. And so I think there's value there, but also we're talking a small scale, because obviously you can't go in and change everything, but your voice does matter, and kind of being the canary in the coal mine can matter. And, even if it's just one triumph where you feel like, had you not been the person there advocating for something different, or explaining to the person above you why perhaps what they want to do is not the best decision, and they listen, or they give a little bit, I'd say it's worth it. You need to have, as we talked about, diversity of view, of opinion. We need to have diversity of thought in these positions. So if you get a bunch of folks who just think the same, you're going to have the same outcome. And so sometimes the harder thing is to stick with it, even when you want to walk away. And I can just tell you from personal experience, I'm glad I left after the Trump administration, because I can think of a lot of instances where it wasn't the biggest impact, but I do think it mattered, despite having some, personal, I think they said angst or anguish about being there in general, but I do feel like it was important to be there. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you.
Right, well, we can take a few Q&As from the virtual audience. Shannon, if you want to ask a few of them for us.
So we do have quite a few from the audience here. I think this is a really good one to start with. This person is asking, do you suggest going to the best law school possible, or the best environmental law program possible, if you know you want to specialize in environmental law?
Go to the best law school. I went to a law school without a big environmental law program. I was very nervous about it. It was fine. I think, frankly, our field is very credential focused. You can be very successful going to a non-elite law school, I should say that, across the board. And if you're choosing between various schools at similar levels, I think it makes a lot of sense to look for places that are going to give you opportunities you're excited about. But I think in general, broadly speaking, if you have the opportunity to, particularly without a lot of debt, go to an elite, quote unquote, elite school, that is going to open doors for you that a less elite school might not. But it is far from a dispositive choice, and there are many great law schools, and you all are going to be incredibly successful in your lives.
I love the disclaimers. But I would say unequivocally, and maybe this is the millennial in me kind of coming out during a Great Recession, but go to the best law school you can get into. The legal field, and some others may have different opinions, is very, very much credential focused. There were unwritten policies, even at where I worked in the government, about if you're not in the top third of the class, then they're just going to throw away your resume. If you're not from this specific law school, then your resume is going to get thrown out. And this is in the federal government. So, and I know other agencies are worse in the government. So I would just say, if you can get into a good school, like the professor said, the most important thing is you become a good lawyer, and the rest will kind of take care of itself to a certain extent. But you can have all the environmental knowledge if you want, but it's hard if you can't really get that first job. So my advice is to generally, when I'm asked that question, is as long as it kind of makes sense from a financial matter, because we do have to be cognizant of the loan situations, but all of that kind of being equal, go to the best law school you can get into, and someone will hire you to do environmental law if you go to a good law school. I promise.
I would echo that, but I'd also just say that if you don't get into that top school that you really want to, it does matter that you do as well as you possibly can wherever you are. And think broadly as you're thinking about sorting out. I mean, I know there's all the specialty rankings that US News and World Report comes out with. I'm happy to say that we bounce in and out of the top 10 at GW. I don't think it's reflective of our program. Our program does not change wildly from year to year. But it is important that you think more broadly, not just about the ranking. What courses do they offer? What internships do they offer? What does their network look like? What kind of career support are they going to provide you? You want to look at the whole package, because it's not just enough to say, I went to a school with a top environmental program if you can't get a job afterwards. So you want to look at that full package of what other kinds of opportunities will you have besides great coursework. All those things matter. And yes, the coursework does matter, of course. You want good professors. They've got great connections. You want to mentor. You want them as your mentors. You want to connect with them. But think holistically about what you're getting out of your law school. But I do agree that names matter.
There was another audience question, Chairman.
Yeah, we have another really good question here. This asks, I have a specific goal and I want to bring offshore wind to the West Coast. May I have some advice on how to shape my career trajectory to make that happen?
I can give kind of sarcastic advice. I think there are better people to answer this question on this panel, particularly someone who's involved with CEQA. But roughly get a bunch of money and donate it to someone whose political campaign, their presidential campaign. They'll appoint you to something. And that may be the best way, to be quite honest, to get there. But I'll let someone give kind of a more legal answer.
I might be able to provide some insights. You're right that West Coast wind has been slower than East Coast wind. Not that East Coast wind has been speeding along either. We're way, way behind Europe. But there's some geological differences. So for example, the North Sea is very shallow. So it was easier to build wind there than in the US. US obviously has had a lot of other issues. The West Coast, though, the land drops off. So it's actually different technologies. It's floating turbines. Now, having said that, there has recently been a lease granted, I believe off the coast of California. I do know people that are working on projects that are actually out there. So it's not that fantasy land. I mean, it is actually pushing that way. Offshore wind is a really interesting area. In fact, I put together a course on that just this past year, and I actually have 3 co-teachers for it, because what you're dealing with offshore wind is there's a lot of environmental issues. Some of them are related to disturbing the seabed, the impact on mammals. There's also a whole set of things that are more litigation related, the impact on commercial fishermen, the relationships with the military who wants to use the airspace. There's a whole energy side to it as to how you're going to connect those things into the onshore system and what that both looks like from an environmental and an economic impact. What kind of market you'll sell that power into, what the market is for that power, how much it will support, who your buyers will be. I mean, it's such a complex area. So I admire your focus. I think it's great to get into it. I'd say, again, be a good lawyer, be a broad-based lawyer. You're going to need all the skills possible. It's a very broad area. Look at doing internships with people like they changed their name. It used to be AWEA. It's now, I think, American Clean Power, ACP, I think. Look at internships with people like, FERC, and think about EPA, get involved with organizations, maybe some of the ones that are fighting against it as well. Again, you need to understand all the different sides. You need to understand all the perspectives to get the best possible projects built, because those are the only ones that are going to get built in the US, is when they've actually met all the different needs. So go to it. But there's lots of different opportunities for getting involved in that, and a lot of different skill sets are needed.
We have another question here. This person's asking, can you please provide some examples of questions that we should be asking our mentors? For me personally, being a new lawyer who's very passionate in environmental law and knowing there is so much more that I don't know can get a bit daunting and overwhelming. A lot of the time I feel as though I don't even know where to start and the right question to ask.
I think one really good question is, what are the experiences that best prepared you for the practice of law, right? I think you're oftentimes going to be surprised by what the answer was. Like, I think some people talked about clerkships earlier. For me, the thing that best prepared me for the practice of law was I did an externship in the district court full-time my last semester in law school, and all I did was write, right? And that's really what you have to be able to do as a young lawyer, is write. So I think just gaining insight into what's going to help you with the practice, because the practice is a lot different than what you're doing in law school.
I think a great question to ask someone is just, what are you working on and what issues are you struggling with right now? I find I learn a lot just from hearing about how my more senior colleagues are thinking through problems or navigating or what's come up. Or I learn about a kind of case I didn't even know we could bring. So I think sometimes it can feel like pressure to focus on mentorship organization and like your career development and your path, but just like use it as an opportunity to learn about how someone thinks about their own job can be really valuable.
One of the ways to break into a field really is, I went to a program many years ago where the person was talking actually about how to gain clients. But the idea being like, you want to be like the people you are talking to. You want to be accepted by them. You want them to feel that you're already part of that tribe. And so part of that is learning the language. And so I really echo the idea, ask about what they're doing, learn their language, learn what kinds of things get them excited, how they talk about issues, because that actually will help you in your next conversation. Every conversation makes you a little bit smarter. And your next conversation will be that much easier and that much better and that much more informative, because you'll be able to relate back and say, I was talking to Elise about, this white collar case that she had, but it was about environmental law. And these were the issues that she was dealing with. And how does that relate to your work? Or is that similar to what you just were talking to me about? And you can start using that as your way of kind of putting pieces together and building your network and making other people feel that you're really a player. And that helps bring you into the conversation and helps, helps your career along.
We have about 10 minutes left, so Chandler, if you want to do one more virtual question, and then I'll go back to the in-person audience.
Yeah, so this will be our last virtual question. I think this is something that was briefly touched on, but I think it's a really good question. It says, Have any of you ever been torn between technical positions and positions that rely on technical knowledge about science, the environment, policy, or law-driven positions? Do you see many instances of careers that have combined both?
For me, my entire career has been about doing all of those things. And obviously, I've already spoken a lot about how I don't consider myself to be a particularly technical person. And even though that's the case, I find myself in a technical role. So I'm never torn. I think policy is critical to every aspect of environmental law. You know, talked a lot about my air compliance practice. When I was at BNSF, one of the things that I focused on was the railroad's California air project, which was all about air policy in California, that if it spread would impact all of the railroads and all of their fleets. And it was primarily policy, right? And like I said, now I'm in a technical role, but I call upon my environmental legal experience all of the time in that role. So for me, like all of these things go together in this particular practice area, but I'm sure others have a different experience.
Right, well, does anyone in our in-person audience have any more questions? Right. Well, thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to all of our wonderful in-person and virtual panelists. All of their information is available online. So if you go to this website or go to the website where you signed up for this event, the webpage on ELI's website, you will find all their bios. And I think on most of the bios, there's also contact information. If you'd like to ask them any questions, I'm sure they would be open to talking with you. And additionally, want to plug ELI Summer School once again. We have 2 more in-person sessions. They will be on July 14th and July 28th. That will be our products regulation session and our EJ session. So we definitely welcome all of you back in person and online. The others will be entirely virtual, so please do register for those if you're interested. And we just want to thank you all so much. And this will be available, the recording will be up on the webpage on ELI's website as well. So if you have friends who couldn't make it, or if you can't make it to the future ones, you can also watch them online. I think that's everything. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for moderating.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so